or the 3 different needles inside of one edge blade, which was very unusual and uncommon to do, especially given the vastly different characteristics and properties which each and every individual needle would possess. Now, as you can see underneath right here, there's a number 212. This actually means nothing more than this is the 212th copy of the 3 trees which we created from the original. For those with very sharp and keen eyes, you might have noticed already that the 212 is actually mirrored or reversed. This is because etching kind of has 2 phases to it as well. You have your initial phase, or the edge blade, which will always be the negative version of the whole process. And then you have the etching, the result or your impression, which will always be the positive version of the whole process. Now this means nothing more than whatever you do on the edge blade will literally be mirrored on the result. And I'm telling you this because if you are willing to try or experiment with etching for yourself, and you want to write down either a name, a signature, a number, a date of birth, date of creation, you will need to mirror everything on the edge blade, otherwise it's going to be reversed on the result, which is going to be very hard to read, unless you are going for something like that, right? Now, why was Rembrandt actually a lot better known or more famous when he still was alive for all of the edge works that he created, compared to all of the other beautiful artwork? And this is actually very easy to understand and to explain as well. So Rembrandt, he definitely did not invent etching or any of these techniques for that matter. He did make it a lot more popular, and because he just made a sheer amount of etchings throughout his life. He used these etchings as kind of his marketing and advertising strategy. So you have to imagine that nowadays it's actually very easy to kind of promote your work as an artist. If you made something beautiful, you just pull out your smartphone, click a button, shoot a picture of it, click another button, and it's published on the internet for everyone to see. Now, unfortunately for Rembrandt, he didn't have access to advanced technologies or the internet, but what he did have is a copper plate, some of these tools right here, an edge press, and depending on which technique you would use, you could reuse the same copper plate for up to 200 times, which means that you can get the exact same result for up to 200 times. So Rembrandt, he would create a lot of edge plates with just him on it, self-portraits. He would create a lot of family portraits of him and Saskia to look like. They'll be more familiar with his name, since his signature is always somewhere on top, or most of the time somewhere underneath. And most importantly, everyone will be more familiar with his style of art and his way of doing things. So since these etchings were so convenient for him, and he used it as his advertising and marketing strategy, is also the major reason why, during his lifetime, why he was a lot better known for all of the edge works that he created. Now I've got 3 very different needles in front of me, representing different technique, or the engraving technique. So this is what I'm holding here. This is an engraving needle, also known as the burin. And the burin has a very sharp, V-shaped tip, sloping down. Now I'm actually not going to ruin this beautiful edge blade, but I will want to show you the motion so you're more familiar with it. Now the burin almost always comes paired with a cushion to support your wrists. So this might be a copper plate, copper being softer than other metals. It is still a metal plate, still has a lot of resistance to it. So you would need to support your wrist in order for it not to strain as quickly, right? And you would, in a very controlled and straight manner, shove copper outside of the plate, like so. And while I'm doing this motion or movement, I'm literally shoving the copper out, creating very tiny copper curls on the top side of this slope. As you can imagine, because of the resistance of this plate, there was little to no room for mobility. It was very hard. It could be done, but it was very hard to kind of go around and turn corners. So usually, after you create an impression, the engraving technique would give you very straight but controlled lines, the ones in the middle right here. Now the second technique is going to be just a little bit more fun for me, since I can actually ruin this blade right here. And this is done with a dry point needle. Thus, this is going to be our dry point technique. Now the dry point technique is also going to be our roughest technique for the following reason. So the burin, or the engraving needle, literally shoves the copper outside of the plate. And as you can see, and this is why it's such a rough technique, let me actually flip this around. What I'm going to do with the dry point needle is literally scratch inside of this copper plate. And as you might have noticed, the copper is actually not coming out. But that copper still needs to move somewhere in order for me to create these beautiful lines. So what the dry point needle actually does is it shoves the copper to the side, creating brambles alongside those lines. Brambles being very tiny, minuscule metallic edges with the naked eye. Ja, ik kan die laatste twee kunnen komen. From these. And last, we've got tree resin. So this is from a pine tree. You mix them together, it's a very soft mixture. And I actually almost have no room to draw on here anymore, but I would still like to show you how easy it is. So let's find a spot, let's say here. How easy it is to kind of create lines in here, right? Or let's, I think this is going to be easier. It takes kind of minimal to no effort, and there's a lot of room for mobility, so I can create circles, I can create waves, and I hope that you can see by all of the patterns that are on here or drawn on here already, that how easy it is to, you can just put more beeswax and kind of creating an airtight bucket out of this beeswax. And it needed to be airtight because we're actually going to fill up this bucket with acid. Now the acid that was used is going to be aggressive enough to bite into the copper itself, but it wouldn't be aggressive enough, or it wouldn't be able to bite away this etching background. So everywhere where that etching background is will be protected from the acid, and everywhere where we've drawn those lines exposing the copper will be bitten into. And the longer you let the acid sit, the deeper those lines and grooves will become, the more impressions you could eventually create. So depending on how long you let the acid sit for, with just the etching technique alone, you can get up to 100 impressions. The engraving needle, since it's such a controlled technique and we're creating very deep controlled lines into the copper plate, really shoving the copper out, you can get up to 200 impressions with just the engraving technique alone. Now, and I might have spoiled this for you already, but the dry point needle technique or the dry point technique or roughest technique, right? Whoa, really wearing out this copper plate by scratching. The main difference is, as you can see, is the viscosity, right? The thickness. The etching ink is a lot more sturdy, a lot more robust. It doesn't even come off my knife anymore. So the main difference is downstairs we would use fresh linseed oil, mix it with the pigments, create a beautiful oil paint. And upstairs, for the etching ink, we would let or fill this vessel right here with linseed oil. Would then let the linseed oil sit outside or in the sun somewhere warm to kind of thicken up. Now this is a very extreme example. So this is linseed oil, very soft to the touch, but it doesn't even come out of my vessel anymore. So a few stages before it reaches this stage right here, we would use linseed oil, mix it with the pigment, and create this very beautiful but thick and robust, very sturdy etching ink. Now on to creating an impression myself. You would first, and I'm actually going to use a copy of one of Rembrandt's etchings. If I can get my gloves on. Known as the baggers. So as you can see, 3 baggers standing in front of a door. And you had to warm up your etch plate before you could work with it. And obviously Rembrandt didn't have such a beautiful heating element that I'm working with right now, right? He would just use a candle. So the reason that your etch plate needed to be warm is in order for this thick and robust etching ink to kind of melt into those lines. So it needs to be warm enough for the ink to melt and cold enough for him and us to be able to handle and touch. So a candle would be more than sufficient. And so let's start with grabbing a little bit of the ink on my rubber, and I'm going to actually coat the whole entirety of this plate. Now I actually always, I'm not sure why, but I always forget to mention this at the beginning of my demonstration. But if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me and I'll be more than happy to answer those questions. I always remember when I'm inking up this plate. Something about inking screams questions, I guess. So as you can see, the ink is actually very easily distributed. And this is because of that heat of the plate. Just a little more. All right. Now, this is what it looks like right now. It's not very exciting yet, but I've just applied I coated up my whole plate with ink. And just to make sure that all of those lines and grooves have actually been filled up with ink as well, and not just the sturdy ink kind of hovering above those lines, I'm going to use this tool right here. So this right here is known as a dabber. This is a very modern dabber. If you were to buy a dabber nowadays, it would look something like this. The dabbers back then were usually created entirely out of leather, held up with just a piece of string. The reason that this is known as a dabber is because of the following motion. I'm going to dab the ink into all of those lines and all of those grooves. Making sure that all of those lines have been filled up with this beautiful ink right here. Excellent. So this is what my plate looks like right now. If I made, there's a lot of stuff on here. If I made an impression just like this, you'd be very, very disappointed in me. It would come out as a black smudge without the drawing visible, and I might have wasted all of your times then. So in order to avoid that, I'm actually going to undo most of my hard work and scrape the surface layer of ink off. This will bring back my plate to life again and reveal the drawing underneath. So as you can see, the drawing is almost fully visible again. And so I just need to clear it up just a tad bit more. And I'll do this with a tarlatan or a linen gaze. Some of you might even notice it's a cheesecloth. It has a lot of holes, a lot of readability. And so I'm going to use this tool right here to kind of scrub off the surface of the plate, and all of these holes will kind of grab the ink on the surface, and it will leave the ink inside of those lines alone. So at this stage I can be fairly aggressive with the motion or the movement that I create. I just need to make sure that I do not apply too much pressure, otherwise I'm still going into those lines, absorbing the ink, which is the last thing that I would want right now. And at this stage you can really play with the feel of the result as well. So you can use a complementary tool, just a piece of cotton, which cotton will definitely absorb all of the ink. So you can kind of put a highlight or focus on different parts of this edge plate. Now I don't have any cotton and I only have tarlatan and limited amount of time, so I'm actually going to try to make this as clean as possible. I'm just going to, this last step is not necessary, but I always like to scrub or clean off the edges, otherwise we're going to get very hard edges, and I'm personally not a big fan of hard edges. Alright. So this is what my plate looks like right now. As you can see, the drawing is clearly visible again. And now we're actually ready to create this impression. So I'm going to grab a paper, and a paper if I can grab this paper, yes, okay. Needs to be just a little damp. The reason that your paper needs to be just a little damp is so it's more flexible, more supple. And the moist will kind of help this paper absorb the ink as well. So let's walk to the edge press. And this is kind of the hardest part for me because I'm very bad at centering this thing. Alright. But this will do. Now the most exciting part, spinning the wheel of fortune. Unless anyone is interested in spinning the wheel for me. To the left. Yeah. And you can do it in a very, yeah, this is perfect speed. So you'll feel a little pressure right now. And you'll eventually feel the pressure releasing as well right here. Just a little more so it's easier for me to grab. Let's take a look. Just a little more.
Okay.
Yes, that's it. Thank you. I actually did a very good job at centering. I'm very proud of myself. Now the moment of truth. Let's hope that my etching actually turned out the way that I wanted it to be. And this will be your result. Now, I'm actually going to put them next to each other so you can exactly see and what I mean with the